Mike Oldfield did not build songs in the ordinary sense. He built worlds out of sound, guitar lines stacked like stonework, tape loops treated like architecture, folk melodies stretched into symphonic journeys, and studio technology used less as a tool than as a private language. This is the story of a musician who spent 50 years chasing one idea: that a recording studio could become an entire universe. Oldfield's music begins in contradiction. There is the shadow, a childhood shaped by loss, emotional instability around him, and a sense of inward retreat. Then there is the sanctuary, the guitar. He learned by ear and instinct, absorbing the finger-picking language of Bert Jansch and John Renbourn without becoming a conventional student of notation. And finally, there is the escape. He left school young, entered the orbit of folk and experimental rock, and found himself inside real studios before most musicians his age had figured out who they were. At 19, in a Tottenham flat, Oldfield created the seed of what became Tubular Bells, a wordless, side-long instrumental suite that major labels considered commercially impossible. The premise was already out of step with the market. This was not a single. It was not a band performance. It was not even easily classifiable. Given time at Richard Branson's Manor Studio, Oldfield did something obsessive and almost monastic. He played, layered, rewound, repaired, and overdubbed the piece himself. Tubular Bells became a 49-minute construction project made from patience, instinct, and mechanical precision. When Tubular Bells arrived in May 1973, it did not explode all at once. It moved strangely at first. The first release on Virgin Records, wrapped in Trevor Key's now iconic bent bell image, selling modestly before the culture caught up with it. Then came the acceleration. The eerie opening theme was used in The Exorcist, and a private studio experiment became part of the public imagination. The album reached #1 in multiple countries, stayed visible for more than a year, sold in extraordinary numbers, won a Grammy, and helped finance the expansion of Virgin itself. A record that supposedly could not be marketed became infrastructure. The Oldfield method is easiest to understand as layers. At the base is classical structure, the refusal of the 3-minute container, the belief that music can unfold like a long-form journey. Above that sits rhythm, not just rock pulse, but percussion patterns shaped by world music, ritual movement, and physical repetition. Then comes melody, pastoral, Celtic, sometimes almost ancient sounding, carried by pipes, harps, acoustic guitars, and small motifs that feel discovered rather than written. And cutting through it all is the lead voice, electric guitar, emotional, distorted, and unmistakably human. Oldfield's career splits into 2 broad eras. The Virgin years are analog, defiant, and often antagonistic. Long suites, multi-track tape, early digital experiments, a constant fight between the artist's need for scale and the industry's hunger for repeatable product. The later Warner and Mercury years are more pragmatic. Ambient textures, electronic sequencing, orchestral projects, digital sequels, and a willingness to revisit the very classics he once seemed trapped by. That shift can look like compromise. It can also look like survival. Oldfield never stopped building worlds. He simply changed the machinery. This matrix shows why Oldfield is hard to summarize. He does not sit neatly on one axis. There is the acoustic traditionalist, Hergest Ridge, Ommadawn, and Return to Ommadawn, where landscape, folk texture, and long-form composition dom. There is the electronic architect, Tubular Bells 2, The Songs of Distant Earth, and the Millennium Bell, where digital tools become new terrain. Then there is the pop and song-based side, Discovery, Earth Moving, Tubular Bells 3, Voyager, and Man on the Rocks. The tension is the point. Oldfield keeps moving between solitude and mass audience, hand-played intimacy and electronic scale. In the late 70s and 80s, Oldfield changed shape again. After therapy helped him become more able to tour and face public performance, the music tightened. The long-form mystic became, at least briefly, a writer of radio hits. Moonlight Shadow proved he could make pop without losing his melodic identity. But commercial usefulness also became a trap. The more the industry wanted Tubular Bells 2, the more Oldfield resisted, becoming a factory for his own myth.
Amarok was that resistance made audible, a 60-minute instrumental maze, defiant, deliberately difficult, and hostile to easy packaging. Heavens Open closed the Virgin chapter. He fulfilled the contract, sang his own lead vocals, and walked away. The studio is the real through line. In the 70s, Oldfield's architecture was physical. Tape reels, hands, splices, patience, and full command over every note. In the 80s, the Fairlight CMI and digital sampling opened a new grammar. Technology finally caught up with the kind of manipulation he had been trying to do manually. By the 90s and 2000s, DAWs, Logic, Pro Tools, and immersive environments expanded the studio beyond audio. With projects like Music VR, Oldfield was not only asking listeners to hear a landscape, he wanted them to enter it. The later image of Oldfield is split between withdrawal and sudden global visibility. By the late 2000s, he had retreated to the Bahamas, away from staff, parties, press rituals, and the machinery of British celebrity. Then, in 2012, the London Olympics brought him back on an unimaginable scale. His music became part of the opening ceremony, broadcast to more than 1 billion people. For an artist often framed as isolated or difficult, it was a massive public validation. Oldfield later described it as one of the most important performances of his life. The world had finally met the private architecture on stadium terms. The philosophy is simple but demanding. First, multi-instrumental autonomy. The studio is not a workplace, it is the primary instrument. Second, long-form architecture. Music can behave like a novel, a landscape, or a pilgrimage, not only a broadcast unit. Third, technological restlessness. From tape to Fairlight to DAWs and VR, Oldfield kept changing tools whenever the next tool opened a new emotional space. And fourth, emotional purity. However technical the method became, the purpose was not cleverness. It was refuge, release, and the search for harmony.
Return to Ommadawn in 2017 felt like a homecoming. After years of software loops and digital grids, Oldfield returned to hand-played acoustic construction, directly channeling the process of his 70s work. Then came the quiet exit. No grand farewell tour, no spectacle. Just confirmation that the public career had reached its end. But the map he changed remains. Oldfield fused classical scale, folk memory, rock intensity, studio craft, digital curiosity, and private emotional necessity into a language that still resists categories. He was not only a guitarist, composer, producer, or progressive rock figure. He was a sonic architect, a restless world builder who followed the sound only he could hear.